Why is the world so drawn to Ashton Hall? Why do millions stop what they're doing just to watch a black man wake before the sun, step into freezing water, breathe through pain, and call it sacred? They say pain makes you powerful now. That waking in darkness, choosing discomfort, is the new path to greatness. That if you suffer with purpose, you're becoming something holy. There's a whole movement around it. Early rising, cold plunges, mental toughness, morning routines, and maybe there's something to it. Maybe there really is something divine in discipline, something powerful in the practice of pushing past your limits, of conquering the body to unlock the spirit, of willingly entering the fire to come out refined. But if that's true, then we have to ask, why wasn't the suffering of black people ever seen as sacred? Why was their pain ignored? Why was their endurance not celebrated when it wasn't a choice? When there were no cameras, no slow-motion edits, no applause, no podcast interviews. Long before it became a trend, black people understood what it meant to wake up in darkness, not to chase success, but simply to survive. They didn't jump into ice water by choice. They were thrown into the freezing depths of slavery and oppression. Their mornings began with labor, not leisure. Their discomfort wasn't curated, it was forced. Their suffering wasn't sacred to the world. It was ignored, exploited, and erased. No one called it greatness. No one said they were leveling up. They said black people were property. They were beasts of burden. They were less than human. They were worked to the bone, whipped into silence, humiliated for generations. And still, they got back up. They kept loving. They kept forgiving. They kept praying to a God they were told didn't look like them. And maybe that's the deepest wound of all, that in the middle of all that pain, they were asked to kneel before a holy image that was never theirs. A blonde-haired, blue-eyed savior, a soft-skinned figure hovering above the suffering, a God wrapped in robes of empire, not dust and sweat and scars. But the truth was never gone. It was buried beneath centuries of conquest, repainted by power, sold back in a color that comforted the oppressor. Jesus was not white. He wasn't a European nobleman. He was born into poverty. Raised in a place people said nothing good could come from. He lived under the weight of empire and the shadow of violence. His skin was dark, weathered by the African sun. His hair was thick, like wool. His features were shaped by struggle and labor. He walked dusty roads, not marble halls. He flipped tables in temples. He spoke truth to power. He was feared by the state. He was rejected by the religious elite. He was a man whose real face wouldn't be welcomed in many of the churches that carry his name. A man who wouldn't be safe walking through neighborhoods lined with crosses on every corner. Black Jesus is not a theory. He's not a modern twist. He's not a political statement. He's the truth, buried, whitewashed, edited, and commercialized. And yet, the people who look like him the most, black people, kept believing, kept hoping, kept praising. They worshipped in cotton fields under the crack of whips, in hush harbors and backwoods gatherings, in hidden rooms and wooden pews, beneath burning crosses and systemic lies. They praised a God who didn't look like them on stained glass windows, but whose spirit moved within them anyway. Today, the world celebrates struggle. It glamorizes discipline. It claps for the ones who choose discomfort to become stronger. And yes, there's beauty in choosing hard things. But what about those who never had a choice? What about those who suffered not for strength, but for survival? What do we say about the people who didn't rise at 5 a.m. to build a brand, but who rose because they had no other option? What do we say about the ones who lived their entire lives nailed to a cross of systemic injustice? If suffering is sacred, then theirs was beyond holy. If Jesus is honored for dying on a cross, then what about those who were lynched on trees? If Christ is praised for enduring injustice and rising again, what do we say about the black men and women who kept rising through 400 years of chains, of laws, of violence, of silence? They didn't call themselves saints. They didn't seek martyrdom. They were simply trying to live, to raise children, to build homes, to hold on to hope. But in their living, in their unbreakable resilience, they reflected the very image of God, the God the world tried so hard to erase. So maybe it's time we stop asking what Jesus looked like, and start asking why we ever believed he couldn't look like black people. But these aren't just metaphors. This isn't just commentary on culture. The story of black Jesus is rooted in real soil, ancient cities, African lands, and historical truths that have been buried for centuries. So let's go back to the land he came from. Back to what history tried to erase, because the truth has always been there. We just haven't been taught to see it. What if the real name of Jesus, and the story behind it, is far more complex than we've ever been taught. We're talking about Jesus' African heritage, a part of his story that has been buried beneath layers of cultural reimagining and theological suppression. The common portrayal of Jesus as a fair-skinned, blue-eyed figure is one that many of us have grown up with, seeing it in religious art, movies, and even in the illustrations of our childhood Bibles. But this image is far removed from the historical and geographical reality of who Jesus was. To truly understand the significance of Black Jesus, we need to journey back in time and place ourselves in the context of first-century Judea. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, a town in Roman-occupied Judea, situated in a region that served as a crossroads between Africa, Asia, and Europe. This geographical location is crucial to our story because it places Jesus in a melting pot of cultures, ethnicities, and influences. The ancient world was not divided by the rigid racial categories we often use today. Instead, it was a tapestry of diverse peoples, with migration, trade, and conquest constantly reshaping the ethnic landscape. In this context, the idea of a Black Jesus isn't about fitting him into modern racial categories, but about recognizing the rich, diverse heritage that shaped his world and his identity. First, let's consider the historical evidence pointing to Jesus' African connections. One of the most striking accounts comes from the Gospel of Matthew, which tells us about Jesus' family fleeing to Egypt to escape King Herod's persecution. This wasn't just a brief stopover. The Holy Family sought refuge in Africa, blending into Egyptian society for years. Egypt, a North African country, had long been a place of refuge for the Jewish people, especially during times of hardship or persecution. This flight to Egypt is more than just a historical footnote, it's a profound symbol of Africa's pivotal role in the story of salvation. The continent that once sheltered the people of Israel during famine and exile now became the protector of the Messiah himself. This African chapter in Jesus' early life foreshadows the global and multicultural nature of the faith he would come to inspire. But Jesus' African connection doesn't end with his childhood in Egypt. Throughout the Gospels, we see evidence of the richly diverse and interconnected world he inhabited. Take, for instance, Simon of Cyrene, the man who helped Jesus carry his cross. Cyrene, located in what is now Libya in North Africa, was home to a vibrant Jewish community. Simon's presence in Jerusalem and his critical role in this defining moment of Christian history reflect the deep bonds between African and Jewish communities in Jesus' time. Jesus lived and preached in a region historically known as Judea, which today falls under the broader term Middle East. It's important to note that Middle East is a modern concept, introduced in the 19th and 20th centuries, to describe the region strategically during geopolitical developments. In antiquity, boundaries between regions were fluid, and Judea was part of a larger interconnected world that shared cultural, religious, and political influences. African civilizations in particular played a significant role in shaping the identity of the region we now call the Middle East. An essential piece of understanding Jesus' identity lies in his name. The name Jesus comes from the Hebrew name Yeshua or Joshua, meaning Yahweh is salvation. While this name was common in Judea, it is significant to note that the linguistic and cultural ties between Africa and the Semitic world were robust during this era. Hebrew, like other Semitic languages, shares connections with Afro languages, a linguistic family that includes ancient Egyptian, Ethiopian Gizi, and Berber languages. This linguistic interplay is a testament to the deep historical and cultural exchanges between Africa and the ancient Near East, further rooting Jesus' identity in a shared African heritage. This broader historical and cultural context resonates with the beliefs of many today, including the Black Israelite movement, which asserts that African-descended peoples are the true descendants of the biblical Israelites. This movement, rooted in both historical and spiritual perspectives, highlights the African and diasporic Jewish heritage often overlooked in mainstream narratives. Black Israelites point to linguistic, genetic, and historical evidence, as well as the Afrocentric depictions of biblical figures, as validation of their claims. While controversial in some circles, their perspectives bring to light the long-standing connections between African history and the biblical tradition. When we turn to early Christian art and iconography, particularly from Africa, we find depictions of Jesus that align with these historical realities. In Egypt, Ethiopia, and other parts of Africa, some of the oldest images of Jesus portray him with dark skin, woolly hair, and distinctly African features. The Coptic Christians of Egypt, one of the oldest Christian communities in the world, have depicted Jesus in ways that reflect their ethnic identity for centuries. This isn't merely a matter of artistic interpretation. These depictions convey a deeply rooted understanding of Jesus' heritage, preserved within African Christian traditions. In Ethiopia, where Christianity has flourished since the 4th century, Jesus has long been celebrated as having African roots. This belief has been central to Ethiopian Christian identity for nearly 2 millennia. So why is this forgotten story of Black Jesus so important today? In a world still grappling with the long-lasting effects of colonialism, slavery, and systemic racism, reclaiming the African identity of Jesus is a powerful act of historical and spiritual reclamation. It challenges long-held assumptions about race, faith, and human worth. It offers a counter-narrative to the Eurocentric version of Christianity that has often been used to justify oppression and inequality. For people of African descent, the image of a Black Jesus provides a profound sense of representation and belonging within the Christian faith. It affirms that their features, their heritage, and their very being are not just accepted by God, but are reflected in the incarnation of the divine. This understanding can be deeply healing for communities that have long been told, explicitly or implicitly, that whiteness is closer to godliness. But the significance of Black Jesus extends beyond the African diaspora. For all of us, regardless of our racial or ethnic background, acknowledging the African heritage of Jesus invites us to confront our biases, expand our understanding of history, and reimagine a faith that truly embraces the diversity of human experience. As we delve deeper into this topic in the coming sections, we'll explore how the image of Jesus was whitewashed over centuries, the theological and social implications of this erasure, and why reclaiming the story of Black Jesus is crucial for addressing issues of racial justice today. We'll examine how this forgotten narrative challenges us to rethink our understanding of faith, identity, and human dignity. This journey we're embarking on isn't just about correcting historical inaccuracies. It's about uncovering a truth that has the power to transform how we see ourselves, our faith, and each other. It's about reclaiming a narrative that offers hope, dignity, and representation to millions around the world. As we continue, we invite you to approach this topic with an open mind and heart. Whether you're a person of faith, a skeptic, or somewhere in between, the story of Black Jesus has profound implications for how we understand our shared human history and how we envision a more just and inclusive future. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the evidence for Jesus' African heritage, explore the historical process of whitewashing, and examine why this forgotten story matters so much in our quest for truth, justice, and genuine human understanding. As we delve deeper into the forgotten story of Black Jesus, it's crucial to examine the evidence that points to Jesus' African heritage. This isn't about speculation or reimagining history to fit a modern narrative. Instead, we're piecing together historical, geographical, and cultural evidence that has often been overlooked or deliberately ignored. Let's start with the geographical context of Jesus' life. Jesus was born and lived in the Middle East, a region that has long been a crossroads of cultures, connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. This location is significant because it places Jesus in an area where diverse ethnic groups have intermingled for millennia. Bethlehem and Nazareth, the towns most associated with Jesus' birth and upbringing, were part of the Roman province of Judea. This region, now part of modern-day Israel and Palestine, has a complex history of migration, conquest, and cultural exchange. The people of this area in Jesus' time would have had a wide range of physical features, reflecting the diverse ancestries of the region. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for Jesus' African connections comes from the Gospel of Matthew. In chapter 2, verses 13 to 15, we read about Jesus' family fleeing to Egypt to escape King Herod's persecution. This wasn't a brief visit. Historical and biblical scholars estimate that Jesus, Mary, and Joseph may have lived in Egypt for several years during Jesus' early childhood. Egypt, a North African country, had long been a place of refuge for the Jewish people. This connection between the Holy Land and Africa wasn't new. It stretched back to the time of Abraham and was deeply ingrained in the history and culture of the Jewish people. The fact that Jesus' family could seek safety in Egypt suggests that they could blend in with the local population, which was predominantly African. This African sojourn is more than just an interesting historical footnote. It's a crucial part of Jesus' early life that shaped his experiences and likely influenced his worldview. Growing up in Egypt, even for a few years, would have exposed the young Jesus to African culture, languages, and ways of life. This African influence on Jesus' formative years is often overlooked but is vital to understanding the full scope of his identity and ministry. Another significant piece of evidence comes from the descriptions of Jesus in the earliest Christian writings. While the Gospels don't provide a detailed physical description of Jesus, they also notably don't describe him as having any features that would have been considered unusual for the region. In a diverse area where people of various skin tones and features intermingled, Jesus' appearance likely reflected this mixed heritage. The Apostle Paul, in his letters, never mentions Jesus' physical appearance as being noteworthy or different from the people around him. This absence of description is telling. If Jesus had features that stood out as unusual for the region, such as the fair skin and blue eyes often depicted in European art, it's likely that this would have been mentioned. Furthermore, in the book of Revelation, chapter 1, verse 15, Jesus is described as having feet like bronze glowing in a furnace, and hair like wool. While this is a visionary description rather than a historical one, it's noteworthy that these features align more closely with African physical characteristics than with the European depictions that became common later. Archaeological evidence also supports the idea of a diverse, multi-ethnic Judea during Jesus' time. Skeletal remains and ancient artwork from the region show a wide range of physical features among the population. This diversity reflects the area's history as a crossroads of trade and migration, with influences from Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. Early Christian art, particularly from Africa and the Middle East, provides another layer of evidence for Jesus' African heritage. In Egypt, Ethiopia, and other parts of Africa, some of the oldest surviving depictions of Jesus show him with dark skin, woolly hair, and distinctly African features. These aren't modern reinterpretations. They represent how early Christian communities, closer in time and place to Jesus' life, understood and depicted him. The Coptic Christians of Egypt, one of the oldest continuous Christian communities in the world, have a long tradition of portraying Jesus with features that reflect their own African identity. Similarly, in Ethiopia, where Christianity has been practiced since the 4th century, Jesus has consistently been depicted as having African features. These artistic traditions aren't mere cultural adaptations. They reflect a deep-seated understanding of Jesus' heritage that has been preserved for centuries. It's also important to consider the cultural and ethnic diversity of Jesus' followers and the early Christian community. The Gospels and the Book of Acts describe a movement that quickly spread beyond Judea, attracting followers from various ethnic backgrounds. This multicultural nature of early Christianity suggests a faith centered around a figure who transcended narrow ethnic categories and could be related to by people of diverse backgrounds. One particularly noteworthy figure is Simon of Cyrene, mentioned in the Gospels as the man who helped Jesus carry his cross. Cyrene was a city in what is now Libya, North Africa. Simon's presence in Jerusalem and his role in this pivotal moment of Christian history highlight the deep connections between African and Jewish communities in Jesus' time. The evidence for Jesus' African heritage isn't just about physical appearance or geography. It's also reflected in the cultural and spiritual themes of his teachings. Many of Jesus' parables and teachings resonate with African spiritual traditions, emphasizing community, interconnectedness, and a holistic view of life that aligns closely with African worldviews. As we piece together this evidence, A picture emerges of Jesus that is far more complex and nuanced than the Eurocentric image that has dominated Western Christianity for centuries. We see a Jesus who embodies the diversity of his homeland, a man whose identity was shaped by the intersection of Middle Eastern, African, and Mediterranean cultures. This evidence challenges us to rethink our assumptions about Jesus and the origins of Christianity. It invites us to see Jesus not as a figure who can be neatly categorized by modern racial classifications, but as someone who transcends these categories, embodying the rich diversity of human experience. Recognizing Jesus' African heritage isn't about claiming him exclusively for one racial or ethnic group. Instead, it's about acknowledging the full breadth of his identity and the multicultural roots of the Christian faith. This recognition has profound implications for how we understand issues of race, identity, and belonging within Christianity and in our broader society. As we continue our exploration of the forgotten story of Black Jesus, we'll next examine how and why this African identity was erased from popular consciousness, and the far-reaching consequences of this erasure. Understanding this history is crucial for addressing the ongoing issues of racial injustice and cultural representation that continue to shape our world today. As we've explored the evidence for Jesus' African heritage, you might be wondering, if the connection between Jesus and Africa is so clear, how did we end up with the predominantly white depiction of Jesus that's so familiar today? To answer this question, we need to delve into a complex historical process known as the whitewashing of Jesus. The transformation of Jesus from a man of Middle Eastern and African heritage to a European-looking figure didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process that unfolded over centuries, driven by a combination of political, cultural, and theological factors. Understanding this process is crucial for grasping why the story of Black Jesus matters so much today. Let's start at the beginning. In the earliest days of Christianity, there was no standardized depiction of Jesus. Early Christian art was more symbolic than representational, often using images like the fish or the shepherd to represent Christ. This reluctance to create images of Jesus was partly due to the Jewish prohibition on graven images and partly because early Christians emphasized Jesus' teachings and resurrection more than his physical appearance. As Christianity spread beyond its Jewish roots and began to attract Gentile converts, the demand for visual representations of Jesus grew. This is where we begin to see the first shifts in how Jesus was depicted. One of the earliest and most significant turning points came with the conversion of Emperor Constantine in the 4th century AD. Constantine's embrace of Christianity transformed it from a persecuted minority faith to the official religion of the Roman Empire. This radical change in status had profound implications for how Jesus was understood and depicted. As Christianity became intertwined with imperial power, there was a push to make Jesus more relatable to the ruling classes of Rome. Artists began to draw on Greco-Roman artistic traditions, depicting Jesus with features that would have been familiar and appealing to a Roman audience. This meant portraying Jesus with lighter skin, straight hair, and facial features that aligned with Greco-Roman ideals of beauty and divinity. This Romanization of Jesus wasn't just about aesthetics. It was deeply political. By portraying Jesus as someone who looked like the ruling class, it helped to legitimize Christian rule and make the faith more palatable to European converts. This trend accelerated as Christianity spread further into Europe during the Middle Ages. The medieval period saw a further entrenchment of the European image of Jesus. As European kingdoms adopted Christianity, they often reimagined Jesus and other biblical figures to reflect their own appearance and cultural norms. This wasn't necessarily done out of malice. In many cases, it was an attempt to make Jesus more relatable to local populations. However, the cumulative effect was a Jesus that looked increasingly European and decreasingly Middle Eastern or African. The Renaissance marked another crucial phase in the whitewashing of Jesus. This period saw an explosion of religious art, with master painters creating iconic images of Jesus that still shape our perceptions today. While Renaissance artists brought new levels of realism and emotional depth to depictions of Jesus, they also further cemented the image of a white, European Christ. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael created enduring masterpieces that portrayed Jesus with fair skin, light hair, and European features. These weren't just artistic choices. They reflected and reinforced the cultural and racial assumptions of their time. The Jesus of Renaissance art was often modeled on the patrons who commissioned the works or the artists themselves, further divorcing his image from its Middle Eastern and African roots. The age of European exploration and colonization marked a dark turning point in the whitewashing of Jesus. As European powers expanded their reach across the globe, they brought with them their religion and their image of a white Jesus. This European Christ became a tool of colonization, used to assert the supposed superiority of European culture and justify the subjugation of non-white peoples. Missionaries spreading Christianity in Africa, the Americas, and Asia often presented a white Jesus as the Savior, implicitly and sometimes explicitly linking salvation with European culture and appearance. This had devastating effects on indigenous cultures and people of color, instilling a sense of racial inferiority and erasing local cultural and religious traditions. The transatlantic slave trade and the system of chattel slavery in the Americas represent perhaps the most egregious use of the whitewashed Jesus. Slave owners and pro-slavery theologians used the image of a white Christ to justify the enslavement of African people, arguing that their darker skin was a sign of God's curse. This perversion of Christianity was used to maintain a system of brutal oppression for centuries. Even after the abolition of slavery, the image of a white Jesus continued to be used to uphold systems of racial segregation and white supremacy. In the United States, for example, many white churches used the European depiction of Jesus to argue for the separation of races and the superiority of white Christians. The whitewashing of Jesus wasn't limited to visual arts. It also influenced theology and biblical interpretation. European and American theologians often read their own cultural assumptions back into the Bible, interpreting Jesus' words and actions through a Eurocentric lens. This led to theologies that often ignored or minimized Jesus' critiques of power and his identification with the marginalized, instead creating a Jesus who seemed to endorse the status quo of European and American society. The 20th century saw the beginnings of a pushback against the whitewashed Jesus. The civil rights movement in the United States, liberation theology in Latin America, and African theology all began to challenge the dominant European image of Christ. These movements emphasized Jesus' identity as a man of color, his experience of oppression under Roman rule, and his solidarity with the marginalized. However, despite these efforts, the image of a white Jesus remains deeply ingrained in popular culture and religious iconography. From Hollywood films to children's Bible illustrations, the European Jesus continues to dominate, perpetuating a false narrative about the origins of Christianity and the identity of its founder. The consequences of this centuries-long process of whitewashing are profound and far-reaching. It has shaped how people of all races understand Christianity, influencing everything from personal faith to global politics. For people of African descent and other people of color, it has often created a painful disconnect between their own identity and their religious faith. The whitewashing of Jesus has also contributed to broader systems of racism and white supremacy, providing a religious justification for racial hierarchies. It has shaped how white people, particularly in Europe and North America, understand their place in the world and their relationships with people of other races. As we confront the legacy of this whitewashing, we're called to engage in a process of unlearning and relearning. This means not only acknowledging the historical inaccuracy of the white Jesus, but also grappling with the theological and social implications of this misrepresentation. Reclaiming the African heritage of Jesus isn't about simply swapping one racial image for another. It's about recovering a more authentic understanding of Jesus that honors the complexity of his identity and the multicultural roots of Christianity. It's a crucial step in addressing the long history of racism within Christianity and working towards a faith that truly reflects the diversity of God's creation. As we've journeyed through the evidence for Jesus' African heritage and examined the historical process of his whitewashing, you might be wondering, why does all of this matter today? Isn't this just a question of ancient history or academic debate? The truth is, the forgotten story of Black Jesus has profound implications for our modern world, touching on issues of racial justice, cultural identity, spiritual authenticity, and human dignity. Let's start by considering the impact on African Americans and other people of African descent. For centuries, many have had to reconcile their faith in Jesus with depictions that erase their own ethnic identity from the story of salvation. Imagine growing up in a world where all the images of divinity, purity, and salvation look nothing like you. This disconnect can create a deep sense of alienation and internalized racism. The revelation of Jesus' African heritage offers a powerful counter-narrative. It affirms that Black bodies and features are not just accepted by God, but are reflected in the very incarnation of the divine. This understanding can be profoundly healing for communities that have long been told, explicitly or implicitly, that whiteness is closer to godliness. For many African Americans, reclaiming the Black Jesus is an act of spiritual and cultural reclamation. It's about seeing themselves fully represented in their faith, not as outsiders or afterthoughts, but as central to the story of Christianity from its very beginnings. This shift in perspective can be transformative, fostering a sense of belonging and empowerment within religious spaces that have often been sites of exclusion and marginalization. But the significance of Black Jesus extends far beyond the African American community. For people of all races, acknowledging Jesus' African heritage challenges us to confront our biases and rethink our assumptions about race, faith, and human worth. For white Christians, particularly those in Europe and North America, coming to terms with the non-white Jesus can be a crucial step in dismantling internalized notions of white supremacy. It invites a reevaluation of how race has shaped their understanding of faith and their place in the world. This reckoning, while potentially uncomfortable, is essential for creating a more just and inclusive Christianity. The story of Black Jesus also has important implications for how we understand and address systemic racism. The whitewashing of Jesus wasn't just about art or representation. It was intimately tied to systems of power and oppression. By reclaiming Jesus' true identity, we're also challenging the theological underpinnings that have been used to justify racism for centuries. This is particularly relevant as we grapple with ongoing racial injustice in our societies. The Black Lives Matter movement, for instance, isn't just about policing or politics. It's about asserting the fundamental dignity and worth of Black lives. The story of a Black Jesus resonates deeply with this struggle, offering a powerful religious and cultural affirmation that Black lives don't just matter, they are made in the image of God and reflected in the person of Christ. In the realm of theology and biblical interpretation, the recognition of Jesus' African heritage opens up new avenues for understanding his message and ministry. It invites us to read the Gospels with fresh eyes, paying attention to how Jesus' ethnic and cultural background might have shaped his teachings and actions. For instance, many of Jesus' parables and teachings take on new depth when understood in the context. The concept of Black Jesus profoundly reshapes our understanding of Christianity, its message, and its role in the world. Theologically, it challenges us to re-examine core Christian doctrines through a new lens. The concept of Black Jesus profoundly reshapes our understanding of Christianity, its message, and its role in the world. Theologically, it challenges us to re-examine core Christian doctrines through a new lens. The incarnation takes on new depth when we consider that God chose to embody a specific ethnic and cultural identity often marginalized and oppressed. This speaks powerfully to divine solidarity with the oppressed. A Black Jesus knows firsthand the experience of being under imperial rule, a refugee, and facing discrimination. Salvation, viewed through this lens, invites us to think in more holistic, communal terms. It calls us to consider how salvation might involve liberation from systemic oppression, healing of communal wounds, and restoration of dignity to those dehumanized by racism. This aligns closely with many African and African American theological traditions emphasizing liberation, community, and social justice. The concept of Black Jesus also challenges traditional associations of whiteness with purity, divinity, and moral goodness. It affirms that dark skin and African features are just as much a reflection of divine beauty as any other human characteristics. Ethically, if Jesus is understood as a man of color who experienced oppression, working for racial justice becomes central to following Jesus. It challenges comfortable, status quo Christianity and calls believers to actively dismantle systems of racial oppression. Culturally, recognizing Black Jesus necessitates reimagining Christian history and identity. It reveals Christianity's deep African roots, challenging the notion that it's a white man's religion or purely Western faith. This can be empowering for Christians of African descent and requires a process of decentering for Western Christians. In biblical interpretation, Jesus' African heritage invites us to read Scripture with new eyes. Many of his teachings take on new depth when understood in the context of African wisdom traditions. It also challenges us to pay closer attention to the African presence throughout the Bible. The cultural implications extend into education, media representation, and the arts, fostering a more inclusive and historically accurate understanding of Christianity and challenging the default whiteness in Western cultural productions. The concept of Black Jesus isn't without controversy. Some argue that focusing on Jesus' race misses the point of his universal message, while others worry it might exclude other racial groups. The goal isn't to replace one racial image with another, but to recover a more authentic understanding of Jesus that honors the complexity of his identity and Christianity's multicultural roots. Recognizing Black Jesus doesn't negate other cultural representations of Christ. The Incarnation allows Jesus to be authentically portrayed in the image of all peoples. What's crucial is maintaining the historical truth of Jesus' Middle Eastern and African heritage while allowing for cultural adaptations that make his message relevant in diverse contexts. This shift invites us into a process of unlearning and relearning. By confronting how racism has shaped our understanding of faith, we open ourselves to a more authentic, just, and liberating vision of Christianity. This narrative intersects with contemporary movements for racial justice and social change, being reclaimed and reinterpreted in the context of ongoing struggles for equality and human dignity. The concept of Black Jesus intersects powerfully with contemporary movements for racial justice and social change. It's not just a matter of historical interest or theological debate, but a potent symbol in ongoing struggles for equality, dignity, and justice. In the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, the narrative of Black Jesus offers a profound theological affirmation that Black lives don't just matter, they are made in the image of God and reflected in the person of Christ. For many activists and religious leaders, this image serves as a source of spiritual strength and a challenge to systemic racism. It counters the notion that Christianity is inherently a tool of white supremacy, reclaiming it as a faith centered on the experiences of the oppressed and marginalized. Prominent figures like Reverend William J. Barber too invoke the image of Jesus as a dark-skinned, Palestinian Jew and calls for social justice, connecting current struggles against poverty, racism, and inequality with Jesus' ministry. In the fight against global anti-Blackness, the story of Black Jesus provides a powerful counter-narrative to centuries of racist theology and cultural representation. The concept also intersects with movements for decolonization and cultural reclamation. In many parts of Africa and the African diaspora, there's a growing effort to decolonize Christianity, stripping away European cultural accretions to recover more authentic, African expressions of the faith. This extends to biblical interpretation, with scholars and activists reading the Bible through African and African American cultural lenses. In education and cultural representation, the story of Black Jesus is being used to challenge Eurocentric curricula and media portrayals. Organizations are working to incorporate more diverse and historically accurate representations of biblical figures into religious education materials. Artists and filmmakers are creating works that portray Jesus and other biblical figures as people of color, challenging the default whiteness in religious imagery. The narrative of Black Jesus plays a crucial role in interfaith and intercultural dialogue, opening new avenues for conversation with African traditional religions and Islam. It affirms the perspectives and experiences of Christians in the global South, challenging the assumption that authentic Christianity is inherently Western or white. However, the use of Black Jesus imagery in racial justice movements isn't without controversy. Critics argue that focusing on Jesus' race might miss the point of his universal message or be exclusionary to other groups. Advocates counter that recognizing Jesus' African heritage is about correcting a historical imbalance and affirming the dignity of marginalized groups. The story of Black Jesus also intersects with broader conversations about representation and diversity in religious leadership. Many Black churches and organizations use this narrative to advocate for greater representation in church hierarchies and theological institutions. In academic theology, the concept has inspired new scholarship, particularly in womanist theology, exploring intersections of race, gender, and faith. Its impact extends beyond Christianity, sparking conversations in Jewish and Islamic contexts about the Middle Eastern and African heritage of religious figures. Ultimately, the reclamation of Black Jesus isn't about co-opting a religious figure for political purposes, but about recovering a lost truth with profound implications for understanding faith, identity, and justice. It presents both challenges and opportunities for shaping a more inclusive Christianity and contributing to a more just world. As we reach the conclusion of our exploration into the forgotten story of Black Jesus, it's time to look towards the future and consider the long-term implications of this powerful narrative. How might the reclamation of Jesus' African heritage shape Christianity, interfaith relations, and our broader society in the years to come? What challenges and opportunities does this understanding present? And how can this knowledge contribute to building a more just, inclusive, and spiritually authentic world? First and foremost, the recognition of Black Jesus has the potential to fundamentally reshape Christian theology and practice. As this understanding becomes more widely accepted, we can expect to see significant shifts in how Christianity is taught, preached, and lived out in communities around the world. In terms of theology, the affirmation of Jesus' African heritage invites a profound reevaluation of core Christian doctrines. Concepts like incarnation, salvation, and divine love take on new depths when understood through the lens of a God who chose to embody a marginalized racial identity. This theological shift challenges Christians to center the experiences of the oppressed and to understand faith as inherently concerned with issues of justice and equality. We may see the emergence of new forms of liberation theology that draw explicitly on the African roots of Jesus. These theologies could offer powerful resources for addressing contemporary issues of racial justice, economic inequality, and environmental concern. They might also foster deeper connections between Christianity and African spiritual traditions, recognizing the shared wells from which they draw. In terms of Christian practice, the story of Black Jesus calls for a reimagining of worship, liturgy, and religious art. We can anticipate a move towards more diverse and historically accurate representations of Jesus and other biblical figures in churches, religious education materials, and popular media. This visual shift, while perhaps uncomfortable for some, has the potential to create more inclusive and welcoming spaces for people of all racial backgrounds. The impact extends beyond Christianity as well. The recognition of Jesus' African heritage opens up new avenues for interfaith dialogue, particularly with Judaism and Islam. It highlights the shared Middle Eastern and African roots of these Abrahamic faiths, potentially fostering greater understanding and cooperation among these religious communities. In the realm of education, we can expect to see curricula evolve to include more accurate information about the ethnic and cultural context of Jesus' life. This educational shift has the potential to challenge long-standing misconceptions and contribute to broader efforts to decolonize knowledge and combat systemic racism. However, it's important to acknowledge that this shift won't be without challenges. The idea of Black Jesus remains controversial in some circles, and we can anticipate resistance from those who feel threatened by this change to traditional imagery and theology. Navigating these tensions will require patience, dialogue, and a commitment to historical truth and spiritual authenticity. There's also a risk that the concept of Black Jesus could be co-opted or commercialized in ways that dilute its transformative potential. As with any powerful symbol, There's a danger of it being reduced to a trendy image or slogan without the deeper engagement with its historical and theological implications. Despite these challenges, the potential benefits of reclaiming the story of Black Jesus are profound. At its core, this narrative offers a path towards a more inclusive and just Christianity, one that honors its diverse roots and speaks powerfully to the experiences of people of color around the world. For Black Christians and other Christians of color, the affirmation of Jesus' African heritage offers a deep sense of belonging and representation within their faith. It challenges the false dichotomy between African identity and Christian identity that has often been imposed by colonial thinking. This can be profoundly healing, addressing centuries of spiritual trauma caused by racist theology and imagery. For white Christians, particularly in the West, engaging with the reality of Black Jesus presents an opportunity for growth and transformation. It invites a process of decentering, recognizing that one's cultural expressions of Christianity are not universal or superior, but one among many valid interpretations of the faith. This can be uncomfortable but ultimately liberating, opening up new ways of understanding and practicing faith. In the broader societal context, the reclamation of Black Jesus has the potential to contribute significantly to ongoing efforts for racial justice and equality. It provides a powerful religious and cultural affirmation of the dignity and worth of Black lives. This narrative challenges the association of whiteness with divinity and moral authority that has long been used to justify racial hierarchies.